PHI 209. You're welcome to study session 1. The nature of philosophy. In this study session, we will discuss philosophy. We will also examine the two senses of philosophy, which is professional or academic. When you have studied this session, you should be able to 1. Discuss the origin of philosophy. 2. Discuss the nature of philosophy. 3. Describe philosophy from the following perspectives: broad sense perspective and professional view. Origin of philosophy. Philosophy has had a most checkered history, beginning with ancient Pythagoras, who first called himself a philosopher. Pythagoras said that people who spurn fame, laurels, and monetary profit for contemplation of nature are the lovers of wisdom. According to him, they are the philosophers. What this means is that the nature of philosophy consists in the contemplation of nature and love of wisdom is very close to the etymology of the word philosophy. When he said the philosophy originally meant curiosity, the desire for fresh experience, or the intellectual culture. The beginning of the history predated the period we know as the ancient or classical period, but the earliest stage is not usually recognized as a stage in the history of philosophy because the stage was marked and dominated with wild speculations, which could hardly be separated from writings and dogmas concerning the gods. The emergence of the Ionian philosophers, otherwise known as the pre-Socrates philosophers, marked the dawn of what we may today call the scientific outlook in philosophy. Scientific thought was born when Thales and others tried to liberate religious and tenacious beliefs from dogmatism and began to reflect on natural experiences so as to form principles subject to the laws of reason. In other words, there was the movement from wild speculation to rational and empirical investigations. We can therefore christen the beginning of systematic, reasonable, and contemplative thought as the age that marked the birth of philosophy. The Ionians made no distinctions between various areas of intellectual enterprise. The sciences, that is, theoretical, pure, and natural, that is, physical, the social sciences, and the humanities were all under the broad ambit of philosophy. With the emergence of scientific philosophy, and with the above description of philosophy, philosophy now becomes the greatest science. It came to be delivered that reason that is detached, disinterested, and dispassionate contemplative speculation could reveal all and everything there is to be known about the universe. This has resulted in grandiose system building in philosophy. Apart from Socrates, most notable thinkers throughout the length and breadth of philosophy's history have succumbed to this view. Examples are Parmenides, Heraclitus, Plato, Aristotle, Plotinus, Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, Hegel, Kant, Whitehead, MacTaggart, to mention but a few. There was a turning point in the history of philosophy when Socrates shifted the focus of philosophy to man. The popular dictum of Socrates goes thus: "The unexamined life is not worth living." This dictum makes a great difference in the preoccupation of philosophers before and after him. While those before him concentrated on the nature of the universe, that is, cosmogony, he and those after him considered man and his existence in the universe. His period signaled the birth of politics and morality. Hence, philosophy became both a theoretical, speculative, and practical discipline engaged in by all those who had the reflective bent of mind. Socrates philosophized through the art of questioning, as this is revealed in most of the Plato's dialogues. It is believed that Socrates did not put any of his thoughts down in writing, but we know of his philosophical beliefs through the dialogues. It is this Socrates method that Professor B.S. Peters had in mind when he said that philosophy is a process of asking questions about beliefs, ideas, and convictions. However, it is to be emphasized that questioning is an instrument of philosophy when it is constructive. The process of questioning often leads to better understanding of issues, new ways of approaching old problems, and progress. If there is anything that describes the true nature of philosophy, it is its critical, theoretical, analytical, and practical concerns. When the philosopher becomes conscious of this nature of philosophy, he does not allow emotional considerations to be cloud or taint his point of view. He considers things not without commitment, which the layman does not always concern himself with, but his commitment is to truth. Philosophy remains the love of wisdom. It is the search for truth. It is the search for reality. Philosophy is a continuous and relentless working towards the attainment of greater knowledge. Philosophers employ reason as his tool in his search for truth. Whosoever shuts the door against the development in other areas of intellectual discourse is not a philosopher. There are no unquestionable authorities in philosophy. No philosopher supposes he has said the last word about anything. This is the reason why almost all issues in philosophy are controversial. Controversy is the engine of philosophy. It is what keeps debate in philosophy, and without which philosophy as an academic discipline would not be what it is. We would have come to the end of philosophizing. Among the tools of philosophy is what is known as conceptual analysis. This tool is used to throw light on dark alleys, clear models in thought, and delineate the logical geography of problems. It has been used to resolve many paradoxes in philosophy. Take Zeno's paradox about motion, for example. Philosophy as a word derives its origin and meaning from two Greek words, philo, meaning love, and sophia, meaning wisdom. Thus, philosophy etymologically means love of wisdom. The word wise in the Oxford Advanced Learner's Dictionary literally means having a showing experience, knowledge, good judgment, prudence, etc. The dictionary meaning implied that it is possible for one to be knowledgeable but lack wisdom. Thus, wisdom has to do with possessing certain qualities which some others do not have. This is probably the reason Pythagoras opined that it is possible for an individual to be wise but lack knowledge. The term wisdom, therefore, goes beyond mere knowledge or its acquisition. Philosophy has the aim of dealing with pulsating problems of life. It is pertinent to note that what brought about philosophy is the desire to both know and satisfy curiosity by the early Greek philosophers. This desire for knowledge and satisfaction of curiosity led them to wonder about man and the world. According to them, that is, Thales, Anaximander, Anaximenes, and so on, all knowledge begins in wonder, doubt, and curiosity. Hence, when you wonder about the world and man, or you ask the question, what is philosophy? You have started philosophizing, because to philosophize is to wonder about life and about the fundamental problems of human existence. This point is emphasized by Aristotle when he says, "It is owing to their wonder that man now first began to philosophize. Plato had earlier put in this way, this sense of wonder is the mark of the philosopher. Stemming from this, philosophy can be adjudged to be all-embracing. The entire universe is its scope and subject matter. What is philosophy? The above question seems to be asking for one-sentence definition. The question also introduces us to question in a brief phrase and helps us to think that a definition will suffice. Here again, the assumption is misleading. It is not possible to give definition which will encompass all what philosophy entails. Apart from this, there is no general agreement about the definition of philosophy. Different philosophers give or offer different answers to the question, just as many philosophers there are. But this does not mean that we should be disappointed simply because we cannot get a universally accepted definition of philosophy. However, there are some definitions which may rightly engage our attention here. Let us start with Plato's understanding of the philosopher. According to him, the philosopher is he who seeks truth. It is he whose heart is fixed on reality. But to Aristotle, philosophy is rightly called the knowledge of truth, while Epicurus defined philosophy as an activity which secures the happy life by means of discussion and argument. William James writes that philosophy, in the full sense, is only man's thinking about generalities rather than particulars. This definition may be a little bit difficult to understand. We shall discuss this in the next few pages when we discuss branches of philosophy and specifically under metaphysics. To Martin Heidegger, the answer to the question consists in our correspondences to that towards which philosophy is on the way, and that is the being of being. This definition, again, is metaphysical. This simply says that philosophy, by nature, is ontological because it is the study of the ultimate reality. Some philosophers consider philosophy as a critical enterprise. For example, A.J. Heyer writes that philosophizing is an activity of analysis. When we analyze concepts, for instance, it is imperative that we raise questions, clarify facts, synthesize facts, and evaluate facts. By so doing, we are being critical. The implication of this is that philosophy instructs us not to be dogmatic and not to be careless in our everyday activities and about the world. Philosophy, Professor J.I. Omoregbe writes, is thus a discipline, the nature and scope, take two, the nature and scope of which is a problem in itself. For it is a critical discipline which does not exempt itself. Hence, the very disagreement among philosophers about the nature of philosophy is ironically part of philosophy. Omoregbe writes further that any conception of definition of philosophy is subject to a philosophical criticism. Hence, no definition of philosophy can be taken as the definition of philosophy, for there is no such thing. He then offers the following two definitions. Philosophy is a rational search for answers to the questions that arise in the mind when we reflect on human experience. It is a rational search for answers to the basic questions about the ultimate meaning of reality as a whole and of human life in particular. From the first definition, we could sift out the fact that philosophy is a search, a continuous search for meaning, for intelligibility, and for answers. The word rational eliminates dogmatism, whereas it accepts criticism. Philosophy raises questions, doubts, investigates, and analysis. It is on the basis of this that man is an inquirer of his own experience. He wants to know why he is in existence. He wants to know why he has to live with other people in the society and why he needs to live a moral life. These are matters of experiences of life, and it is on them that the philosopher reflects. The essence of this reflection is to attain truth about his existence, the knowledge he claims to have, and the meaning of life. The other definition focuses attention on the philosopher who engages in the search of the fundamental reality of the world. Some of the pertinent questions which philosophers often raise are: what is reality? What are its meaning, nature, and subject matter? Is reality attainable? What is the meaning of life? Is it possible for man to live alone? That is, an isolated existence. Is democracy the ultimate reality in politics? And so on. All these are some of the questions which philosophy attempts to answer. This question does not enjoy a unified answer. Rather, what we can boast of are different descriptions of what philosophy is and what it is not. One of such descriptions is that philosophy is an activity and not a subject. In other words, you do philosophy, that is, like when you ask questions about the world and man, rather than learn it. A unifying factor about the questions of philosophy asked is that they can be answered through reasoning. While other disciplines seek answers to their questions through empirical methods, such as studying nature or ancient manuscripts, conducting experimental survey, and so on, empirical investigation do not answer philosophical questions, even though the outcomes of this investigation, new discoveries, and new data are often relevant to philosophy. Some of the questions which the philosophers have considered are: 1. Does every event have a cause? If they do, is this compatible with being able to make free choices? 2. Do our sense of sight, touch, hearing, taste, and smell present us with a true picture of the world around us? 3. We each have a body of flesh and bones, and we also have a mind. Are minds separable from bodies? Could we have mind without bodies? Do minds and bodies interact? And if so, how? 4. When we judge that someone has done something morally good or bad, are we doing any more than expressing our own personal views? Can morality be anything other than subjective? From the questions, it should be clear, especially if you apply the tools of philosophy to scrutinize these questions, while observation or experimentation may not be able to answer these questions. You will, however, have a deeper insight and understanding into them when you study philosophers like René Descartes, that is, mind and body problem, David Hume, that is, empiricism and causality, and Immanuel Kant, probably because of the lack of unanimous definition of philosophy. There are different conceptions or senses in which philosophy can be conceived: the broad or popular sense and the technical or academic sense. As earlier mentioned, what philosophy is cannot be easily put together into one sentence definition. This is because philosophy as a discipline has a very wide scope. For us to be able to adequately account for the meaning and implication of the values of philosophy, there is the need to examine the following connotations of philosophy. Philosophy as the love of wisdom. This perhaps is the first meaning the Greeks gave to philosophy when that word was coined from two distinct words, philo and sophia. To the ancient Greeks who lived about 500 years before the birth of Christ on the island of Miletus and Ionia, seeking knowledge may be a common inherent quality of man, but there are few who seek wisdom, which is invariably higher than mere knowledge. Not just for personal gains, but because they love wisdom. Wisdom, for the Greeks, consists in the ability to draw meaning from experience, to judge experience wisely, to see beyond what merely meets the eyes. In those days, philosophy included all knowledge as basis because an ignorant person, a man who knows little or nothing about the fact of nature and existence, can hardly be wise in relating facts to each other. Logic, mathematics, physics, medicine, cosmology were all areas in which the philosopher was involved and interested. The point is that the philosopher tried to transcend this empirically limited judgment and experiences into a higher realm where the philosopher becomes a seer, almost a prophet who sees further and understands better than most men. Thales, Anaximander, Democritus, Plato, and Aristotle are a few of the Greeks historically recorded as the first philosophers in the West. Philosophy as the search for reality. If wisdom consists of something higher than ordinary experience, that is, something that transcends mathematical and empirical knowledge, then it must have a subject matter. What does wisdom aim at achieving? What is its goal? What does the philosopher try to grab? The Greeks' answer to this question is that philosophy is a search for reality. What is this reality? How does this differ from what is given in ordinary experience? Thales tried to explain this by stating that although nature gives us various objects in experience, the air, trees, man, animals, hills and mountains, rivers and valleys, fruits and seeds, and so on, they must all have been objects created from one basic stuff, just as a potter can make a cup, a flower vase, spoons, plates, pots, tables, and chair, among others, using the same material known as clay. If we break all the products of the potter, we will have only one material, one basic stuff out of which everything came into palpable experience. Thales identified this basic stuff as water. Other Greek philosophers suggested air and earth. But it was the philosopher Anaximander who took Thales' search to a level which is truly beyond experience. He identified what he named the limitless, which is neither a substance nor an empirical object. It is something beyond sensible experience. One can therefore comfortably say this was how the beyondness of philosophy came to be identified with one of the most conventional branches of philosophy, that is, metaphysical, a Greek phrase which means beyond the physical. Different philosophers have identified this reality as matter. Others say it is the idea something mental. This will be dealt in greater details in metaphysics. What is important is to note that reality is also variously identified as the being, existence, or the thing in itself. In contrast to the thing as it appears, that is, phenomenon, philosophy as the search for truth. This definition has a close relationship with the last definition. The important distinction is that we can speak of reality in the sense of being something substantial, something to be described or at least grabbed by way of identifying some inherent qualities, that is, the characteristics it possesses by its own nature. Reality is thus generally regarded as something that has its own independent existence. This means that who regard matter as reality believe that its own existence does not depend on the prior existence of any other thing. But there are many aspects of knowledge which do not directly relate to existence. When one says, for example, it is raining outside, another person at the same place and time says, it is not raining outside. We want to know who of the two is making a statement whose description corresponds with the actual state of affairs outside. Now, this is not talking of existence as such, but of the relationship between an empirical situation and a human judgment. It is this relationship that we label as true or false, whichever we regard as appropriate. There is no doubt that many philosophers are engaged in this type of exercise. So, when philosophy is defined as the search for truth, it is basically this type of exercise that we have in mind. But philosophy goes beyond this elementary determination of the truth and falsity of empirical judgment. In fact, this exercise almost exclusively falls within the realm of the empirical sciences. The truth the philosopher seeks also has to do with the comparison of truth arrived at through different processes: physics, biology, chemistry, medicine, social sciences, religion, etc. In short, there is a sense in which philosophy, as the search for truth, tries to establish a truth, or even the truth, which is supposed to supersede all other truth in different spheres of man's rational endeavors. In fact, some will go as far as saying that the search for this truth is the same thing as the search for reality. This is because what is taken to be reality is also regarded as the truth. Philosophy as the rational explanation of nature. When Thales and other Ionian philosophers tried to find the basic stuff out of which objects in the world were made, that is, not in the sense of biblical creation, mind you, we are told they used human reason and relied mainly on the facts of experience. Before them, Homer and other Greek poets used both intuition and supernatural notions to explain nature. The idea of gods and goddesses, of spirits that populate the world and control human affairs, was the popular myth. Thales, Anaximenes, and their associates wanted to explain nature in such a way that we need not go beyond man into the supernatural to explain such experience as change, motion, and permanence, which are the most common features of human experience. To give a rational explanation of nature is to postulate hypotheses, and Thales said everything is water. It remained within the human realm of understanding. Maybe it is important to note for the sake of history that none of the Ionian philosophers completely got rid of religious and supernatural ideas from their writings. What is true is that they refused to accept the universe. Today, physics, chemistry, biology, medicine, etc., as practiced in the West, adheres of this rationalistic method of explaining nature. The point is not that any of these disciplines is philosophy by itself. The fact is that each of these themes is pursued from the orthodox point of view that nature is completely explainable in rational terms, at least until very recently. The philosopher comes, for example, in the form of Albert Einstein, who postulated that physics can proceed on the assumption that time and space are relational, while Marx's planet quantum theory illustrates how both of them can be multidimensional. Philosophy as the formulation of metaphysical systems of cosmologies. If man can explain nature in rational terms, it means that man can understand not only the nature of every distinct object in the world, but its relationship to each other. We are not now talking of the relationships among states, continents, oceans, and mountains. What philosophy deals with is much more fundamental than what physics, for example, how it is related to chemistry, and so on. Again, how the laws are each related or unrelated to the laws of biology, psychology, etc. Are these different laws, or do they constitute members of the type or group, a universe of natural law? Philosophy, for a long time, was seen as attempts to formulate speculative theories in which every aspect of nature falls into its appropriate place within one general design. Later on, speculative axioms were replaced by what were regarded as postulates, axioms, from which deductive systems dealing with or explaining different aspects of human experience can be built, as Jacob Bronowski once put it. Philosophy as the critical or logic analysis of language. At the beginning of the 12th century, philosophers in many countries in the West, mostly Britain and United States of America, became disillusioned with speculations which from day to day moved further away from the realities of human experience. Many came to the conclusion that philosophy has come into some sort of obscurity because the language in which its themes and theories are written makes use of spurious entities and expressions whose inferences and implications are not easily tractable. The central task of philosophy came to be seen as that of explaining, clarifying, and marking out the logical as well as semantic implications of our language of expression. This linguistic term, as it is sometimes called, came to a point where Professor Noam Chomsky, a renowned grammarian, marking out the deep structures of language from their surface structures. One of his most popular examples is the following. A. John is easy to live. And B. John is eager to live. Traditional grammar will analyze both sentences as having John as the subject and is easy to live and is eager to live as predicates to A and B respectively. But a close look at the meanings of easy and eager reveals that while John is the actor, that is, the subject, who lives, in B, he is the receiver, that is, the object to be left. In A, his later analysis, generally known as part of generative grammar, is for Chomsky the same as the analysis the philosopher is interested in, while not denying that philosophy as pure analysis goes beyond mere grammar. The philosopher is interested not only in semantics, that is, meaning. He is also interested in the ontological status of words like shadow, punctuality, mind, God, among others. Chomsky's generative grammar may be said to be interested in those also, but definitely not to the level of drawing metaphysical distinctions. Philosophy, as analyzed, therefore, lays emphasis on the clarity of terms, consistency in argument, and hypothetical verification. The belief is that once our language of expression is clear, ambiguous and semantic, we will be in a better position to know what exactly we are talking about. This greatly enhances the possibility of reaching some consensus on important matters both of everyday life and of philosophy. The popular problem of whether there is a mind apart from the physical body has been dealt with in modern times as purely linguistic problem. But today, the feeling is that there is so much to the problem than problems of language. Philosophy as the search for the ideal life. This definition of philosophy comes up in the last place not because it is the most recent definition of philosophy in chronological terms. In fact, Socrates, the father of Western philosophy, saw himself as a philosophy in this sense, according to the Greek tradition into which he was born. To know the truth, the real in matters of character or virtue, is not merely to have a theoretical awareness. To know the truth, to know what is good, to lead a virtuous life. When the philosopher was therefore identified as the seeker of the ideal life, he has also presumably regarded as somebody who lives the ideal life. Philosophy was therefore the search for the ideal life and how to live it. Socrates demonstrated this when he was in jail in Athens, condemned to death for allegedly leading the youths against the state. His friends came in the night, ready with plans for his escape. Socrates' reply was that he had always thought that a good citizen should obey the laws of a society. Since running away from prison, that is, and invariably from his condemnation to death, amounts to disobedience, Socrates would do no such thing. Philosophy as the concern with human existence. Philosophy, after moving away from this traditional view of its enterprise for a very long time, seems to be moving systematically towards it. This is not to suggest that philosophy's central concern today is practiced as the formulation of first principles of morality, which are regarded as guides to the good life. When that philosophy, rather than being the concern with pure objectivity, has not seen the need to take human interest and nature into consideration. What is the goal of living? What is man's position in the scheme of things? Where does it come from and where is it going? These are some of the questions raised and tried to be answered by existentialists like Søren Kierkegaard, Martin Buber, Albert Camus, Karl Jaspers, and Martin Heidegger. Philosophy for the existentialist is not abstract speculations about reality or the objective world. Man as the subject is the determinant and discoverer of truth. Human interest, his harmonious relationship with others, his experience and his reason, all defines himself before he then turns to understand and explain the world. Hence, for the existentialist, existence precedes essence. Man exists first before he tries to discover the essence of life, nature, and the world. Philosophy as reminders of familiar facts of everyday experience. This is how John Passmore, in his book Philosophical Reasoning, tried the fundamental question of whether there are special modes of reasoning which are characteristics of philosophy. After noting that a philosopher spends a great deal of his time in describing or clarifying or defining or analyzing or disproving, he reminds us of some familiar facts of everyday life. An illustration may be relevant here. When I say I have a mind, I make a simple, commonplace statement. But when asked to state in precise terms what the word mind means, we may have to pay attention to simple facts, which the statement either ignores or takes for granted. If a doctor opens up any part of the body, he will never come up with a physically located entity which he labels mind. This is a well-known fact, but is this mind then a spiritual entity? Or is it a process in the brain? Or is man just a physical body without any object which is called mind? As a second example, democracy preaches freedom. Hence, a society in which no laws prevent anybody from sending his or her child to school can be said to run an educational policy that recognizes freedom. But we all know that unless education is free, there are many economic and social conditions which can make the sending of my children to school impossibility, unemployment, lack of some physical infrastructures, and so on. What then becomes the freedom granted in law but rendered ineffective by other social or political organizations? Views of philosophy. The broad or popular sense of philosophy. Philosophy in this instance simply means a way of life or a worldview of people's beliefs which express their world outlook. In this sense, G. Chatelain sees philosophy essentially as the pursuit of wisdom. Thus, the search for the God of life, which is related to culture or at best a subset of culture, since a people's worldview must embody their language, art, religion, myth, behavior, ideas, values, and the other elements in the universe of culture. What these views recommend for a good philosopher, according to Olusegun Oladipo, are insight and commitment to human well-being. What this means is that a philosopher should be able to advance in a significant way the comprehension of the condition of man as a means of building the capacity of man to coping with the challenges of man. In addition, philosophy is understood by a lay person, that is, the average woman in the street, as a philosophy of life. Philosophy in this sense means, according to Alverson, an attitude towards a certain line of action, a general view of life, or a general theory of principles about how we ought to conduct our lives. This is the reason why if you ask a woman on the street what her philosophy of life is, she may give answer like, "My philosophy of life is live and let live," or "I don't like the philosophy behind materialism." From this, it becomes clear that to a lay person, a philosophy is the sum total of our fundamental beliefs and convictions, meaning the principles with which they pattern, guard, or control their life. Another way in which the average woman understands philosophy has to do with being a philosopher or getting philosophical. This idea of philosophy can be seen in a situation where an argument ensues between two people. If one eventually wins the argument by sustaining a position in a systematic, logical, and consistent manner, the person is mostly referred to as being a philosopher. Conversely, in another argument, and one of the parties gets very imprecise, lumped up ideas, and becomes vague and ambiguous about her ideas, claims, or statements, to the lay person, the individual is simply getting philosophical. Hence, to the lay person, philosophy involves matters that are uncommon, profound, beyond the understanding of most men, or at worst, simply vague and imprecise. Academic or professional conception of philosophy. As mentioned earlier, the enterprise of philosophy is not easy to define. The reason being that it is difficult to point at its subject matter the way we can identify those of other disciplines like biology, economics, political science, for instance. In addition, we equally cannot identify a technique as the philosophical method the same way we talk of the scientific method for the sciences. This thorny nature of philosophy is acknowledged by Chukwudum Okolo. Thus, to some people connote something mystical, mysterious, difficult, esoteric, reserved for massive intellect only. Others think of philosophy as a subject which deals with matter out of this world, in a spiritual return. Others still call philosophy people, worldview, or one's moral guide. Hence, discussing the nature of philosophy is usually not without some debate. In spite of this complex nature of philosophy, we cannot but describe what philosophy is about. Consequently, having defined philosophy as worldview, on the technical academic sense, it can be described as a rational critical activity, that is, a critical and conscious effort to understand the universe, its origin, and man's place in it. In this sense, philosophy is nothing but a critical theory, challenging the prevailing descriptions of ourselves and other situations, offering new descriptions. If enables, take 2. It enables us to look inward to ourselves and examine those ideas we live by in a bid to know the attainability or suitability of coping with life's challenges. H.S. Taniland captures it as the criticism of the ideas we live by. This aspect of philosophy is endorsed by some African scholars like Olusegun Oladipo, Kwasi Wiredu, J.O. Sodipo, Ayo Fadahunsi, among others. This they accept in contrast to the Eurocentric account of philosophy as originating from the ancient Greek city-state of Miletus. In spite of their critique of Eurocentrism, ancient Greece remains the first place in Europe where philosophy was systematized as a discipline. Kwasi Wiredu, for instance, underscores the point of philosophy critical thinking thus: the function of philosophy everywhere is to examine the intellectual foundations of life using the best available modes of knowing and reflection for human well-being. In addition, you should bear in mind that critical nature of philosophy is not just about social criticism. It equally concerns, as J.O. Sodipo opines, reflective and critical thinking about the concepts and principles which we use to organize our experience in morals, religion, in social and political life, in law, in history, and the natural sciences. The import of this is that philosophers both examine ideas, values, and principles through which societies are patterned, and also study and question the theoretical foundations of other disciplines, while raising issues regarding the plausibility and credibility of certain forms of explanations in some of these disciplines. For instance, can the scientific method be imported wholesale into the social sciences? Considering the nature of their object of study, can human beings be subjected to scientific experiments? It is based on some of these questions and issues raised in other disciplines that give birth to branches of philosophy such as philosophy of law, bioethics, philosophy of religion, philosophy of science, philosophy of education, philosophy of the social sciences, to mention just a few. Philosophy as critical thinking and academic sense is therefore the intellectual dimension which propels one to think by oneself. Thinking by oneself entails 1. To propose hypotheses and concepts. 2. To structure, to articulate and to clarify, to reformulate ideas. 3. To understand the ideas of others and self. 4. To analyze. 5. To identify the relation between examples and ideas. 6. To argue. 7. To make judgments. 8. To initiate practice of critical thinking. For example, logic. Study session summary. In this study session, we examined the origin of philosophy from the point of view of the pre-Socrates philosophers. We examined what philosophy is, how its subject matter and methodology is different from that of other disciplines. We also highlighted the various philosophical questions that interest the philosopher and how answers to these cannot be gotten through empirical investigation, like in the sciences, but rather through reasoning. We examined what philosophy is to both the academia and the layperson. To the latter, we said philosophy is a way of life, like an attitude to life. To the professional philosopher, however, our understanding of philosophy goes deeper than this. Philosophy is a critical, rational, and reconstructive We have now come to the end of Studies Session 1. Thanks for listening.